Welcome back to Pivot Points. I'm your host, Dave Allen, founder of Brand Pie, the brand consultancy working with businesses to deliver impact at pivotal moments in their journey. The path to success is rarely linear, and if anyone can help chart a course to the top, it's Ordnance Survey's current CEO, Nick Bolton. He was a software developer, product manager, and marketing director before taking his first CEO role. And the story behind that move is an emotional roller coaster that truly highlights our mortality. His journey is rich with insight for the bold, for those of you with ambition and a dream. So listen on, and you'll discover whether leaders are born or made, the balance between luck and desire, and why Nick's greatest leap forward was a PA role with a pay cut. Fantastic to have you here today, Nick, and really excited to listen to your journey in life and your career. Nick, would you just start by introducing yourself and giving our listeners a little bit of your background?
Well, great. Well, thanks for having me on. I'm Nick Bolton. I'm the CEO of Ordnance Survey, a 230-year-old organisation. I'm not 230 years old.
I can see that.
But my background is I was always passionate as a kid about products and trained as an engineer, went straight really into the high-tech industry, software developer into project manager, into product manager, into salesperson, into marketing director, into CEO. And then I became a CEO in 2005 of a small listed business called Oximetrics. We grew that. And then I switched to Ordnance Survey 2 years ago after 18 years in post there. Always been excited about running businesses, building organizations to delight customers and all the great things that come from tech, where if you can imagine it, you can pretty much build it.
So where did you get your love of technology from? Was that with some of the early tech? Were you a gamer or?
So I was a gamer. But really my first access to a computer was one. My dad was a lecturer at Cambridge, and he brought home a computer for the holidays from the new, personal computing lab at the engineering department in Cambridge. So he brought home a Commodore PET, if you can remember what they look like.
I can remember. There's probably one in the loft.
Yeah. So the Commodore PET, and basically my brother learned how to program it, and I learned how to play games on it. And so it was the days where it was all tape. So you put your tape in to upload the game into the computer. You played it. When you turned it off, there was no memory really, permanent storage on board the computer. So you had to play the tape again to upload the game the next time. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. We then happened to be in Cambridge at the right time. So we got hold of the Model B BBC microcomputer. So I could code really from that point. My dad then He'd set up a new course at Cambridge called the Production Engineering Enterprise Tripos, that's now called Manufacturing Engineering Tripos. One of the parts of the course was you were allowed to, was trying to get the students not just to actually practice their engineering by setting up real companies. So the final year project, actually you pitch to a bank manager, an accountant, and an entrepreneur your idea. And some of these students started setting up their own businesses, kind of by mistake, really. That wasn't the intention. It was to educate them, not cause these spin-outs. So this is sort of 83. And so my dad then decided he had a wizard idea, and he kept one foot in the university, but also set up this company called Cambridge Robotics. And they got a contract with the British Library to make a new style of photocopier, or scanner, if you like, that opened ancient books only to 90 degrees, because you couldn't open an ancient book to full 180 and just photocopy it. Rather, it would open it to 90, and then they had this very early CCD camera that would scan it in. So they managed to sell the British Library 5 of these, and then he needed some muggins to go and build it for him. So he and a couple of others did all the design on it, and I built them. So actually, from that point forward, I was always taken with this idea about the magic that the sort of the economic alchemy that technology can bring, especially software. It doesn't exist. It's almost the purest artifact of idea, to implementation. And if you get it right and you serve someone's need completely, then you can do that for a large number of people without any marginal cost to sell it or provide that to that next person. And that was fantastically exciting for a kid who was, selling toy soldiers in the playground, or goes on Pocketeers. That was the beginning of my fascination with products. So I was the kid that had all the catalogs, but none of the stuff, because I couldn't quite bring myself to make my, commit to purchase. Nor did I actually have the financial wherewithal to buy them. But it did mean I spent times poring over soldier catalogs, Tamiya remote controlled cars, Hornby railways, Subutio, and so forth. And actually, through that, I started to really see, for me, what made one product more attractive than another. And I learned out that was called product management. So I know this is sort of a bit boring, but I've been wanting to run tech businesses since I was 13 years old.
Yeah. No, and a lot of the people I've spoken to on the pivot points all started getting their thirst for business in their early teens, or sometimes before it, with their paper round.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
we've had some long conversations about, is a leader born or is a leader made, and is a leader born and made?
Yeah. And the answer is both. I mean, that's true for everything, right? There is definitely some things that help in your nature, but there's an awful lot of nurture in there as well. I mean, if I was to really be clear, my dad's business failed. Yeah. So Cambridge Robotics, I mean, it failed in the sense it didn't make a lot of money. It broadly washed its face. Yeah. But it was his life, in lots of ways. It became his weekends. It became all of our weekends. It became all of his evenings and so forth. And I really felt very determined. So he thought it was a big success, right? So he was really excited when it was on. It was on Tomorrow's World, and there was also an article in New Scientist about it. And so from him, his background as an engineer, he thought, great, this is it. I've done it. This is a
Yeah.
win. And all I was thinking was, no, Dad, you've sold. They've got a second follow-on order for a further 4. You've sold 9 photocopiers to the British Library, and that's pretty much the world market saturated now for photocopiers that open ancient books to 90 degrees. And so I was then always interested in the dynamics of, I'm not interested in the pure technology. I'm interested in the benefit it brings. Yeah. So my direction then was, I didn't want the constraint that my father had actually put on the rest of the family. Rather, I wanted to work out a way, or how do we take that wizard idea, but delight a sufficient number of people that the thing can become self-sustaining for employees, self-sustaining for the marketplace, and self-sustaining for actually the community that then works
Yeah.
around that.
But that's an incredibly young age to figure that out. A lot of entrepreneurs would not figure that out until they've had like 3 or 4 failures in a business. So,
well, yeah, but you could also argue all it was a young lad who was trying to stick one over on his dad. There are, and ever has it been
and who
thus,
doesn't
right?
want to do that?
Cat Stevens, father and son, right? So there might be some, post-career rationalization that's gone in there. No therapy, but clearly perhaps a need for some form of therapy. But I was always interested. I mean, the Pocketeers business that I had in the playground. Do you remember what Pocketeers were? I'm not. It was sort
Yeah.
of ball
Yeah.
bearing games in plastic.
Yeah.
And so the great thing about that is that I realised that selling toy soldiers meant that you actually had to invest in soldiers up front, and then you sold them in smaller packets. That's how I did it. But the
Yeah.
great thing about Pocketeers is it was a rental business. Yeah. So as long as you charged the rent at an appropriate point, you'd covered your costs for the capital outlay, and then the rest of it was pure profit. So
Yeah.
that now I didn't have that description of it. I just knew that
No,
I
I'm
had more
going to say,
money in
if
my
you had
pocket at
that,
the end of the day.
that would have been impressive at that age. But, it's instinctive. So you come out of university,
Yeah.
and you decide to go into software engineering, or?
Well, I decided I wanted to do something in tech. Yeah. And the problem was I graduated in 1992. So Black Wednesday was the Wednesday after I got my results. And if you can remember back to 1992, it was a really
I
tricky time for
remember it
jobs.
vividly.
Do you?
Oh,
Were you
yes.
working in 92?
I was running a group company at WPP, and
Oh,
we
really?
literally halved in size in
It
about
was a
4
bad time.
weeks. It was not a pleasant period.
No, it wasn't. And actually, as a new grad, you'd been through all of the milk round and been told, this was a double honours degree in business and engineering. It's a very small course. It was only one of 6 courses like it in the country. We were supposed to be walking into jobs, yeah. And I graduate,
Yeah.
and there are no jobs. There was a great job at Dixon's store group to go and do supply chain purchasing for their own brand, hi-fis that they used to sell in Dixon's. That's the job I really wanted. Like getting on an aeroplane, going to the Far East and trying to source the next SciShow in-car radio or whatever. No, they didn't want me. Mercury didn't want me. And so really, by that time, I could code, yeah, but there were no coding jobs. But I also knew Apple Macintosh computers inside out. So my first real sort of business book that I bought was From Pepsi to Apple, which I'd got when I know I was 14 or 15. And so by then I'd sort of fallen in love with the whole Apple story. I was an Apple fanboy before it was a thing, right? And so I'd saved all my holiday job money to then get the educational discount to buy a Macintosh LC with color monitor and laser writer LS from Runcorn Apple Center. And so I was good. I knew Macs, and so I got a job actually at Apple Center West One. So if you were at WPP in London at that time, we were the Apple agency that was fulfilling computers and software and services for Abbott Mead Vickers, WPP, and all of that sort of Adland folks.
Yeah.
So we may have even met during that time when I said, I'm really sorry, your computer's broken, but it's not my fault. So basically, I really went back to what I knew, which is I knew I could do tech support. And there is a great education that comes from when you're dealing directly with your customer. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of people who've worked in hospitality, people who've worked in customer service, because you soon learn the power of communication, the importance of being clear and spending more time listening than you do, bleating or carping. So I did that job. I had applied for a software job because I wanted a proper career. I didn't plan to work in a shop for the rest of my life. Yeah, but it was fun driving the Fiat Punto with printers that were broken around, central London, dropping them off at ad agencies, explaining to, car parking ticket attendants that no, you weren't going to be more than 5 minutes and it was all going to be okay, all that sort of stuff. And I applied for a job coding at a small bespoke software house out in Slough, Langley near Slough. And I went to the interview. They all said, that went really well, but we don't need Pascal or basic programmers right now. We want C coders. So come back when you've learned C. So I then taught myself C on the bus up from East Dulwich up into central London, and then went back 3 months later, said, right, I can code C, give me the test, I'll pass it. So I passed it, flying colours. And then they said, that's great, you passed it, but actually we haven't got any jobs for C coders now because there was a massive pullback going on. So, tremendous. I've done this thing. I thought I was going to get a job. And they said, that said, the chairman wants a PA who can also write demos for him. Are you up for it? And I just wanted a career,
So of course.
I took a £1.5 pay cut to go and do that. And it was one of the best decisions I've ever made, because there I am sitting in board meetings with all of the seniors. It's only 120, 130 people, but I'm sitting in board meetings, less than 6 months after graduating, maybe more 7 months after graduating, really learning how businesses work. And the person I'd worked for, Martin Anderson, who actually I'm still in touch with, was ex-Logica main board. So had worked with Micro Focus, as in the Coval, the company based out in Newbury. And so again, I was sort of right suddenly, but completely by chance, at the very heart of what was part of Britain's real coding capability as a country. So luck, yeah, a little bit of determination and an awful lot of luck.
It does sound like you made your own luck there. I mean, your determination, your desire to get into the tech industry, you could have just sat back and not done anything.
Yeah, I could have not tried to persuade my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, that taking a £1.5 pay cut was a good idea, given we didn't really have very much money and she was still studying as a student. And what happened then was, I was in the door for, about 8 months, and then lo and behold, they ran short on a project, and that project needed C coders. And so I then became a coder. And Martin was a bit grumpy because he'd lost someone who could write demos for him and was his PA. But I'd got my start then on the coding ladder. And then, as I said before, coding into projects, into product. But, genuinely a great environment and a great company. SoftWrite was. Really, really enjoyed my time there. They paid for me to do... I realised the importance of marketing. So I'd done some marketing at university. And I decided that I needed to be much stronger on that side than I was. And so I took myself off to evening college to get the Chartered Institute of Marketing's diploma in marketing, externally examined, but is taught. So I went to Thames Valley University, Slough Technical College, I think is what it was actually called, and did that whilst holding down a job. And I don't know if you've ever done it, but doing education at the same time as holding down a job is two different brain sports, and it's hugely draining. And I was living in Oxford, I was working in Winchester, and this college was in Slough. So twice a week I drove Oxford to Winchester. No Newbury bypass, so you had to get through Newbury before 7 o'clock in the morning. Drove up through Ascot up to Slough, and then 10 at night, drive home and rinse and repeat twice a week. And then I passed, which is great. And it really did help. I mean, I'm a big fan of the diploma in marketing.
What made you want to do marketing?
Because for me, let's frame marketing as part of the 4Ps, right? Product, price, place, promotion. Yeah, everybody thinks that marketing is just the promotion bit, and Mark Holmes' piece is incredibly important, but it works really well if you get the product right, the price right, and the channel by which you're selling it right. And so for me, if you think about the essence of the way that any organization creates value for a customer, you need ticks in all those boxes. And so the marketing framework actually is the right way you always can think about any business. Now, it's not exclusively that, because you've got to then be more mindful of other things like human capital, technology, and so forth. But effectively, in defining what the essence of any one business is, you can define it really in and through those four dimensions. And if you're weak in one, then you can make it up with the strength in another. So that was really the motivation. Is I really felt that the marketing in that broad sense was at the heart, was the essence to any business, and so better get qualified in that. And actually, that both moved me forward, but also held me back, because it then meant really I sat on a marketing seat, and I'm sure you've got other examples of this within your career, is that people don't necessarily see marketing folk being CEOs. They might see heads of sales being CEOs, but not necessarily marketing folks. So actually, when I went back to Oxford Metrics in 2005, I actually went in as the group marketing director, or as a main board position. And actually, that was part of the attraction. I was the product marketing director at the previous business, but that was nowhere near the board. I was part of the management team, etc., but I was nowhere near the board. And Oxymetrics had decided that they wanted main board representation for marketing, because they felt that in lots of ways, they had a market size problem. So they dominated the market, they had 80% of the market share, but they'd got interesting technology that could be used elsewhere, but they didn't have a mechanism to actually take that technology into other markets. So they really figured that was a marketing and a product marketing problem, rather than just a technology problem or a human capital problem. So they'd seen that, and they then wanted me to come and do that. I think it was helped in part by the chair at the time there, and he really did see marketing in that broader sense. He's also a genius marketing communicator. And so he said, well, if you've got this problem of interesting tech, but you don't understand the markets where that can go to, that's a marketing problem. Who's in your experience, is the best marketing person to come and solve that? And they tapped me up, because I'd worked for the organization earlier between 95 and 99 when I was employee number 13. So they knew the mettle of the idiot that they were trying to hire.
And what did you think of the transition? Because that's quite a big pivot to go from coder software into CMO role in a fast growing dynamic.
Yeah. So the journeys in between were coder, product manager, a little brief doing project management, but really that was because I was looking for another job at that same software house, then into really a product management role. So I was the first hire at this business called Oxford Metrics in the entertainment space. So previously, motion capture, are you familiar with motion capture? Reflective dots at various joint points. It was used extensively in life sciences, so analysing children with cerebral palsy. And they had found in 1994, 95, that the competitor they thought was almost going bust, because they're doing so well in life sciences, suddenly found the entertainment market, and they're selling it to video games companies. And so they wanted to hire someone who was technical, but also who understood the video games market. And I was a gamer at that point, as I said, take it all back to the pet computer. And so the story about that ad was, I'd seen it in the Guardian on a The Guardian on a Thursday used to be the place where you'd find all tech jobs. Yeah, I'm sure it was. There was no, I don't know which day of the week was marketing, but I'm sure you knew which day that was
No,
yourself.
I didn't change very much.
Oh, I see. Well, Thursday was tech, and I'd seen this advert in there. I was living in Oxford because my wife was working there, but I was working down in Slough or down in Winchester, and so it was
Yeah,
unusual to see an ad for an Oxford-based company. This is well before Oxford really had the reputation for technologies it has today. It was much more the arts university at that point versus say Cambridge Phenomenon. All of the tech companies that come out of Cambridge. So I'd seen this advert in the Guardian, and they wanted however many years worth of experience, sales, experience. So they wanted this wish list of stuff, and I thought, well, that'd be a nice job. But no one, I didn't know what motion capture was. Nobody knew what motion capture was because it was not used. And then 3 months later, I didn't apply for it. 3 months later, I saw it in Edge magazine. And Edge magazine, if you're not familiar with it, is it's the adult video games magazine. I don't mean that in a nasty way. I mean it's the one for the thinking gamers magazine. Yeah, and it was about video games as art. It was about the technology that lay behind it. So much more sort of like the auto car, as auto car is to cars. This was to video games, and they put the
yeah.
advert in there. And so then I thought, well, they clearly haven't filled this. Maybe I'll throw my hat in the ring. And actually, if they're advertising an Edge, maybe they do know what they're talking about. Anyway, so I went through the interview process and then I got the job. And it was great because there I was, employee number 13, first time on the entertainment side, a founder who completely understood the product model, was all about how do you create happy customers, coupled with a sales and marketing director who understood you can't be all things to all people. So Julian was this fantastic inventor. He'd invented this technology that could measure where a 3D marker was, but then he just tried to sell it to anybody who would buy it. And Pete came in from Beckman Medical Devices and said, "Look, Julian, this is all very well that you're off in a swimming tank trying to track what a diver's movements are. Over here, you put the markers on a crash test dummy, and we're seeing how the dummy gets beaten up. But actually, that's not a repeatable solution. You need to find a repeatable audience to build a repeatable product and sell it in a repeatable way." And so he said, "Which one is the one you've got most like that?" And Julian, again, to his credit, said, lower limb gait analysis for children with cerebral palsy. And so then, if you're familiar with crossing the chasm and the idea of whole products, that organization then built the whole product to serve exactly that community. So they
Yeah,
worked with
yeah.
some international academics to say this is an appropriate form of measurement for children with CP, that this is the model by which you need to assess it, this is the where the markers you need to put it is, and then and it's an effective treatment. So by monitoring all the way through, this is an effective treatment for a child who presents in this way. And then that became the de facto standard by which they studied and then intervened, be that through physiotherapy or through orthopedic, surgery for those children. So that's the business that they built. So when they then recognized there was this little interesting opportunity happening in entertainment, Pete's natural inclination was, well, let's get someone who understands it and let's build a whole product for that market. And so that's what I did.
That must have been fantastic.
They let me loose on the world. I mean, it wasn't well paid.
Yeah, wow.
It really wasn't very well paid. But I don't know, in my sixth or seventh week, within the first couple of months anyway, I was on a plane flying to Japan to go and see Nintendo. Now, for a kid who was into video games, yeah, that it doesn't get much better than that. And so, and the lovely thing about the leaders of that business is how patient they were with the small group of us who were trying stuff. We got some stuff hideously wrong. So this was the very early days of Flash. Yeah, we needed a website. So my wizard idea was to create a Flash-based website that was all black, and until you put your mouse over the all black website, it would shine a little light on a little clickable link. In other words, I made it harder for people to find the information. Now you could argue that was just an extension of the gamer in me. There, I was trying to gamify this thing. But instead of Pete blowing up at me, I've just wasted however many, I don't know, a couple of thousand because we didn't have a lot of money to spend on the project. He said, "It's not working. What do we need to fix it? What would you do about it?" And was completely patient with me. And
Mm.
that if there's a lesson there that hopefully I take into my model leadership, there, it's exactly that. You have to be forgiving of the iterative process. Yeah.
Yeah. And that technology has grown and grown and grown now. I mean, it's
Oh,
sort
amazing.
of
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely central to film industry, isn't it now? Motion
Completely.
graphic.
So if you saw the first big breakthrough for us was being used for Titanic, that
Oh,
came
right.
out in what was that, 97 or so. So that was the first sort of big movie he'd worked on. There'd been a few before that, Mary Riley, but really it was used a lot in video games. So we worked on a lot of football games for people like Sony, for EA, for folks like Creative Assembly. So, but my sales target for all 4 years I was there was £1 million worth of business. And in my final year, I think I did something like 650, 680. So in other words, I never hit target. But the business was predicting for years that entertainment would outsell life sciences. And it took another 20 years for that to happen. It
And
also
that,
helped the life sciences grew over that time and so forth, because that's the business I rejoined. So I then
yeah.
rejoined a business that had grown, had got this interesting technology that I understood well. It's related to computer vision, which again I understood well. And also in 2005, the reason why the job was so interesting is, the cameras were only growing, imagery and the importance of imagery in all sorts of pipelines was only growing. So, what a fun playground to go and play in.
Yeah. And when you rejoined, was that as CEO then at that
That
point?
was CMO then at that point.
CMO. And then
Yeah.
when did you get your first CEO role?
So that same year. So it's quite a sad story. Do you want to hear a sad story?
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's the sad story. I joined at the end of January, and the role had become available actually because Pete had retired. So, really my first mentor, Pete Meddings, had retired. I went to his leaving during the September before and seen all of the sort of folk again. And Pete had seeded in Julian's mind that given the business was facing a few challenges, wasn't it great to see Nick? And actually, he never should have left. And so Pete then arranged to have lunch with me in the October, and he said, "Would you ever think about coming back?" And I said, "No, come on, I left for a real reason. It's not right. I'm interested in these things right now." And he said, "Well, listen, would you at least have a conversation with Julian?" And I said, sure, I will. And the business I was with at the time was sending me off to the States to go and sit at the back of the airplane to make good that some of the US sales rep, he was just burning through tech services people. Yeah. And I was the product manager at this business. And because this person couldn't keep tech services people, I was having to sit at row 50, whatever, fly over there to bail him out. And so, with any leaving decision, it's about the combustible environment. Yeah. And actually, that was the combustible environment that then meant I happened to get a call from Julian while I was in the queue to board that plane. And I said, absolutely, I'll see you next Tuesday. And so they then made the offer. I joined at the end of January. And then unfortunately, I got a call from his daughter, Pete's daughter, on the Friday to say that Pete had died. So very sadly, he'd had a stroke. And she didn't know anybody else in the business except for Julian. And because she couldn't get a hold of Julian, she knew about me because Pete kept talking about me. Oh, it's all going to be good because Nick's rejoining the business. So I then had to tell my new colleagues that unfortunately Pete had died. And then on the Saturday after that, my mother got taken into hospital and she died 8 weeks later. So through all of that, it did not focus the mind, right? When you're actually faced into the reality of your own mortality. So I went into the business then. I went to this management meeting. Bear in mind, I come from a business where we didn't really have a lot of money. Yeah. So we needed to collect the revenue from customers in order that we can make the payroll 3 or 4 weeks later. So that's the environment I'd come from. It was tricky. And there I go to this business that's sitting on, I don't know, 4.5 million in cash. And this pipeline is not where it should be, right? So sales are nowhere near it should be. And Julian asked me at the end of this management meeting, any observations? And I said, well, I find it astounding that we're 6 weeks. Bear in mind, again, this is the environment I'm still going to visit my mum in hospital. I don't understand. We're 5 weeks away from the end of the period, and the numbers are clearly not where they are, and none of you are talking about what you're going to do about it. And there was a sort of ums and ers and general sort of humbumbling, and then the meeting ended. And so after that, I decided really that I needed to have a conversation with Julian. That was, look, I can help you here, but if we're gonna do that, we've got to change some of the culture. We have to be very serious about how we serve customers. And before I could have that conversation, Julian said, "I want you wanted a meeting with me." And said, "Before you say anything, I want to say I want you to be the next CEO of the business." And I've realised I've made a big mistake. I'm happy to undo, the stuff that I've made as a big mistake. That you can then run the business forward. And so then, aged 36, I was thrust into my first CEO of a public company.
And what did that feel like?
Well, because I knew the business well and I really cared about it, the first point was let's fix the business, right? So there were two mantras there. One was about we need to fix the existing railroad and we need to go and find ourselves another railroad. In other words, the reason why they hired me was to go and find other opportunities, right? Find the new railroads. We couldn't pause that. We had to carry on doing that. But now they'd given me remit to go and fix the existing. And, everybody at that business, everybody at Oximetrics, was hugely aligned to the task. They really were. And actually, there'd just been some poor decisions about the way they'd set up. They hadn't, been very good with truth. They hadn't been clear with some folks. And so actually reconfiguring that business so that it could deliver on its pipeline, deliver on its product. So basically it launched a product the July before, and we had yet to ship one out to a real customer. And the problem is they don't buy your old product. It's the Osborne computer problem, right? They don't buy your old product once you've announced the new one. And so one of the most important things was how do we get that to fix in market? The other thing was how do we make sure we sign a big important customer to signal to the market that the thing works and it's valuable and it's interesting. So with that and a few other very clear goals, I corralled a team of about 12 or 13 of us from across the organisation, regardless of line reports. Everybody who felt that they could muck in and solve for it mucked in, and we had to do a headcount reduction because we couldn't afford the level of burn there was. We'd also stopped doing some things. So we stopped doing things, we changed that cost base. EA became the customer that we had to win. And so our US arm was super focused on that. And by the July, so 3 months later, EA had signed and we had a shipping product. And so actually, although we'd lost money in the first half, by the time we came to the full year numbers, we actually showed a profit because we fixed the first half profit and delivered enough to make a profit for the full year. So again, what a great environment then to actually lead a transformation of the business. Early success that was, is not always easy to come by, but it was immediate sustenance for the journey.
But coming into a CEO role in what sounds like a commercial crisis and having the cut through, the focus, the engagement to get people with you to take structure and hierarchy out of that situation and just do what's needed to get the business back on its feet. That's crisis management in action, isn't it?
It didn't feel like that at the time. It just felt like, well, so does the product, pass muster? Well, the customers want it. They so want it. They're not buying any of the old ones. What do we need to do to get it working? And then what do we need to do to get the sales machine working? And what do we need to do to get the marketing machine working? And that, so really all it was an holistic soul, which of course is easier to achieve in smaller organizations. Yeah. But again, with people that I already had empathy with the situation, both the customers as well as the team around. And also I had buy-in, it wasn't like me coming cold from another organization. A lot of the people who were there in 2005 had been sad to see me leave in 99. Not everybody wanted me back, but there were some people there. And actually that's enough. You need a small group of well-motivated individuals and you can move mountains. Yeah. People will come with you. Yeah. And so that's really what that was. The harder thing, and actually I've always said this, risk reduction is easier than risk expansion. Yeah. So in other words, crossing stuff out is much easier than taking bets on new markets. So actually seeing the product that wasn't yet finished, it didn't quite do what customers needed to do. The to-do list writes itself. Yeah. Find out what's wrong, get a team around to fix it, test it with customers, deploy it, sell it, away we go. But then actually the year 2 was then about, okay, where do we go next? And actually that then became a large number of cheap, small experiments. So actually it was about taking off our best salesperson and putting them in charge of not doing tea and biscuits type business development meetings, but proper ones saying, this is the stuff we got. You're a customer I should talk to. If I had this, would you buy it? No. All right, thanks very much. Next. And that's the
Yeah.
way that they went about it. And that then led really to two specific startups. One was a business called 2D3, and the other one was called Yotta. That actually traces its history and alignment then to where we are here at Ordnance Survey. One did taking video imagery from aerial platforms, unmanned and manned, so you can see effectively drones at the time. And this was early we were doing this. And the other one effectively tried to do Street View before Google did Street View. Then when Google entered Street View, we realized there probably wasn't going to be a market for us there. Google came to us actually and asked, could they buy our data? And we said, well, we've got Leeds and a bit of London, but if you pay us, we'll do the rest of the country. And they said, no, thanks, we'll do that ourselves.
Yeah.
We're one of the first users of Mechanical Turk, the first product out of Amazon Web Services. So a really great environment to do that. But what that Street View imaging led to was road surveying. Road surveying then led us into software to view and manage all of that data that comes from road surveying. Then lo and behold, we wanted to stick on a map. And what's the backdrop map we used for that? It was Ordnance Survey. So actually, then when I was contacted about this role, they said actually, I said, yeah, I don't think it's me. What do I know about map making? And they said, well, look at your technical history. You've been measuring things for years. You've been surveying, and you've been doing a lot with remote sensing. Oh yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that. And and that's really where the conversation began. And and that's all 2.5 years ago. Now I'm here.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big pivot to go from the commercial sector into a government agency. What learnings have you got from that sort of transition?
Well, it's not. We're a GovCo, so we are about as arm's length as you can possibly be for an arm's length body. Yeah, but in lots of ways, the way we run the business, it feels just like running a PLC. So, Oximetrics was a small AIM listed PLC, and within those, you have constraints about who you can tell what to whom when, the price sensitive information, etc. You have to have a sensible degree of governance around the way you run your business in order to make sure you protect the investments that investors have made into you. So actually, all of those things I recognise here at Ordnance Survey. So it just happens we haven't got a number of shareholders. We've got one really important one, and it's called the government. And so they sit on our board. That's a bit easier in some ways than being a PLC, because in a PLC you sit around the board table and you say, well, should we do A or B? And you can't just turn to the shareholder and say, well, should it be A or should it be B? You actually have to either go on your gut or go on your knowledge of your 10 largest holders and what they'd want you to do, or is it the right thing to do, and so forth. So there are some benefits that really do come from that. But otherwise, the annual report we write, it looks like a PLC type report. So for me, I don't know sure I see any difference. We have a slightly different procurement rules in the way we buy stuff. But again, they're the sort of things that you'd recognize if you're working in a large company anyway, because they need to be necessarily transparent and necessarily clear and careful. So for me, it was a very natural transition. The thing I love about it is that Ordnance Survey is so important for the country. Clearly people know us for our paper maps, but actually it's our data, it's our 600 million features that is the best and the most accurate and the most informative digital map of Britain that actually underpins pretty much every walk of modern British life. We estimate that every UK adult touches OS data 42 times a day. That's reach. That's proper reach, right? Whereas, if you think of the business I was in before, we had plenty of customers all around the world, 70, 80 odd countries, but it was still a very niche application. The thing I love about this opportunity is that if we can get this right and get that data to power yet more applications to drive more destinations for our data, which is our clear strategy, then that has outcomes for the whole of the country, for education, for health, for roads, for highways. And that, for me, fulfills the objective that I kind of set myself back as when I was a teenager, when I've always been excited about the value that businesses can bring to communities. In fact, the reason why I did production engineering was that I was particularly interested in the benefit the manufacturing industry can bring to communities, because they employ everybody with all sorts of diverse sets of skills, analytical skills, marketing skills, practical skills, sales skills. And if you can get that right, then that has social benefit for everybody in that community. They used to estimate in Silicon Valley that I think it's for every engineer that was employed in Silicon Valley, there was something like 20 other jobs in the other services communities and other communities that are there to effectively put around the engineer to see that success. That's really what I wanted to create. And so my motivation then really for being here is about how can we ensure that the technology business that Ordnance Survey is today genuinely creates better outcomes for Britons in all walks of life, from national security to health, from resilience through to transport. Ordnance Survey underpins all of that, and yet I know we can still do more.
That's amazing. I mean, that's probably a great point to end on, and I could chat to you for another hour or two quite happily. And I mean, I wanted to ask you about the digital transformation of Ordnance Survey, but maybe we save that for another day.
Well, I'd be happy to discuss the day. I mean, what I would say is that that's already happened. This sort of business is already a completely digital organization. It's just that we're so famous for the paper maps that represent, what is it, 3% of our revenues. The other 97% is all digital.
You see, nobody would ever guess that. That's a big branch if you've got to do there, isn't it?
It is, but what a wonderful brand to do that from. I mean, you get it from your
it's one of my favourite. I mean, I'm an avid user, and I've nearly got as many as you have behind you in your cupboard.
Well, that's great. And they'll always be, they are absolutely the access point for us and our business. But in lots of ways, they are just a little pinnacle, though, of all of the data that we actually hold for the country. And it's about how do we make sure that people understand. And and the way in there is that Sunday's Rambler is Monday's Business Executive. So that's all we have to do. Get that bit right, and then for the use of spatial data to unlock all sorts of values across our country and our world, they're guaranteed. They're nailed on.
Fantastic. I mean, it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. And we always finish pivot points with a little fun fact. And I've just got 2 words for you: synchronized swimming.
Yeah.
Go.
Are you going to leave? Do we just leave it like that?
No, you got to tell me about it, because you're definitely the first person I've talked to that is a fully qualified.
Have you never spoken to anybody else involved in synchro?
No.
Okay, your life has been shallow up until this point. It's now
that's a good one. You've obviously done that before.
So my daughter was faced with the choice to complete all her Kellogg's, swimming certificates, and her swimming teacher said to her, "Well, you've got a choice now, Emmeline. You're a good swimmer. You can either do competitive length swimming, or you can do this thing called synchronized swimming." "Well, what's synchronized swimming?" "Well, it's like ballet, but in the water." "Oh," says a little girl, "that sounds really interesting. I'll do that." It turned out that in Reading we live, which is where we live near, it was a very strong club. In fact, 3 of the Olympians who swam in 2012 came from that club, and they were coaching in that club. And so my daughter goes along to that. 2012 is all happening, so 2011 build up to it and so forth. And she's seeing the Katies, Katie Clark, Katie Skelton, oh my goodness me, she's going to kill me. Katie Dawson. Apologies, Katie D, if I've got your name wrong. And she was bitten with that Olympic spirit that was flowing through the country at that point. And I'm not the sort of person who just sits in the bleachers and stands by. They wanted volunteers to come and do. I mean, it's by far the hardest sport, right? They have to do breath denial training, so swim up and down as long as you can underwater. You're not allowed to touch the bottom, so you've got to be able to tread water super hard. You've got to be physically fit, have incredibly core strength. It's much harder than length swimming. And also you've got to be elegant. So you've got to be extensions and so forth. And so when you watch the teams do synchro, if it all looks really quite straightforward, that's the elegance, right? That's the bit you've got to try and get to. And so I was the coach sitting down one end on a Sunday night with a stopwatch, timing the teams as they went out, swim back and so forth. I trained as a lifeguard. I'm not a very good swimmer, so I had to do my lifeguard training. In whichever pool you're in, you have to be able to swim to the depth of that. This was a pool in Reading that had went down to 4.5 meters, which is quite deep for a lad who's not very good at swimming. And you have to go all the way down and pick up the dummy and pull the dummy up from the bottom. But I passed all my life-saving stuff with the Olympians. which was great. The only thing about it is these, all of the coaties, they're all just muscle, and muscle's more dense, doesn't float, right? Unlike what's on me, right? The rest of the tissue. And so I'm trying to pull Katie D, by her chin across the pool, and I just can't without having her sink because she's so strong. Yeah. So that's my background with synchro, and that meant 6 days a week. My daughter was in the pool from 5:30 in the morning, comes out 7:30, gets to school for 8. Then at the end of the day, pick her up 4:30, feed her a Shell garage sandwich, take her into the pool, or take her into the dance studio where they do all of this dance, the work through the routines on the lounge, and then in the pool till 10 o'clock on a Friday night, rinse and repeat. Wow. 6 days out of 7. They are as hard as nails, and I absolutely take my hat off to them.
That's fantastic. I mean, what a fantastic story to end on, and wish you and Emily every success. I mean, that was just a pleasure to listen and talk to you. Thank you so much, Nick.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Pivot Points. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find more fascinating conversations with industry leaders in our previous episodes. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to know more about BrandPie and how we deliver impact in the pivotal moments that matter to you, head over to brandpie.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.